Thank you guys all for being here. I want to welcome everyone in the room. This is about building communities, and we've given up a very nice Minnesota May Day to come inside and hopefully learn some tools to help us make this world a better place. We have three keynote speakers, and they're in the areas of parenting, health, and safety, and they'll be followed up by a Q&A. I'd like to give you some general information about the format we have here. It's really about slavery, aka human trafficking. Human trafficking is alive and well. It involves sexual exploitation of children, homelessness, poverty, and at-risk youth, and that's just to name a few. It's having a huge tax burden on our nation, so it affects us all, even though you might not think you see it. It's there. Hopefully we can walk away from today with some tools and resources to help you identify the signs in the community to make this place a better place and to protect your children. Global slavery is the world's fastest growing illegal industry. It affects us in Anoka County, in Minnesota, in your neighborhoods. It takes place in our communities and our schools, as you will learn as this afternoon progresses. We're not trying to scare you guys, but we want to arm you with tools to make this community a safer place together. So the speakers on the panel have three focus areas to build a safe home environment. Steve Fitzhugh will help us understand how to listen to our kids in the home so they can share what is going on around them. From Patty Wetterling on how attitudes, behaviors, and perceptions affect health and safety in our children. And from Grant Snyder, he brings his professional authority on how the reality of tracking in our community and insights on how to spot signs to keep your kids safe. I'd now like to introduce my first speaker, Steve Fitzhugh. Steve speaks to thousands of children each year around the country and abroad. His expertise transcends age, as he can be found in a variety of venues impacting youth, the old, through his gift of communication. His talks help people make positive choices in life, whether it's in a college, campus, corporate boardroom, or NFL locker room. He identifies with his audiences. He sees what they see, he feels what they feel, and he understands life's challenges. Please welcome Steve Fitzhugh.
Good afternoon. I am very, very pleased to be here and have this opportunity to share with you my expertise is with youth and all things youth, and I get the privilege of meeting with the parents and traveling and speaking. I did have a chance to play for one of the greatest football teams in America, your favorite Denver Broncos. Hold your applause. Oh, there's a Denver Bronco fan. Great. Two of you. And people always ask me, since I played in Denver, did I play with a guy named John Elway? How many of you have heard of John Elway before? I did not play with John Elway. John Elway played with me. And but someone asked me earlier, were you a Redskin fan? I lived in Washington, D.C. for 20 years. My last game came when we actually lost the Super Bowl to the Washington Redskins. And to be honest with you, I'll be clear and transparent. When we lost the Super Bowl, I cried. In fact, I cried all the way to the bank because I still got paid. Yay! But today I spend my time as a national spokesperson for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I travel under the umbrella of Power Moves, my own speaking company. And I'm on about 150 campuses, high school and middle school and college campuses a year. And my heart is with the young people. And I'm so challenged by them, and they're such a peculiar people that I get excited and I got a lot of energy because I spend time with them. I want to tell you just a little bit about myself, and then I just want to share a few things with you, and I'll take my seat. People look at me and they see some of the things I've been able to accomplish and experience as I travel around America and I travel abroad. I've been in a variety of countries, and not too long ago in Zimbabwe, and just a few months ago I was in Iraq, and people don't believe I came from the family I came from. And one of the most powerful things about my upbringing was the way my mother nurtured me. And she struggled in her relationship with my dad, and they divorced. But as a single parent, she always challenged me about what my life would be like one day. And I began to dream about what I'd like to see and experience. And I remember my mom telling me directly, she said, "Boy, you're going to have an office with your name on the door one day." And I always dreamed of that. As a matter of fact, I have a youth center in Southeast D.C., and my director, I'll never forget today, and she heard me say that a number of times, and she gave me a name plaque. "Steve, this is for your door." And I'm like, Hercules, Hercules, Hercules. But because of those dreams, I began to aspire, and I began to make decisions that were consistent with where I wanted to go in life. And I meet so many young people around the country, and I meet so many young people who struggle with their possibilities, and it's a tragic thing to meet a 16-year-old who's already lost his or her ability to dream. And I didn't even know we were poor until somebody in school told me when I was a kid, "You must be one of the poor students because you use paper tickets to get your lunch." I didn't know we were poor because my mom instilled in me an aspiration to live every day as an adventure. And to take every experience that you have as an opportunity. And I look back on that, and I look where I am today, and I'm excited what I've been able to see, experience, and accomplish, but I'm even more so motivated to impact our young people. And how times have changed. Because of this thing called the internet, a child's first exposure with pornography before the internet was about 11 years old. But since the internet, it's about 5 years old. Times have changed. And the advances in technology have made our world so much smaller. And in fact, because of technology, predators have leveraged the internet not only to expose what is normally prohibited, but to gain knowledge that would potentially place themselves even on our doorsteps in pursuit of our children. And it is incumbent upon concerned and conscientious families to know, prepare, and to respond to this. The first line of defense is with our parents. Parents must know what places our children at risk. And I was reading recently in Psychology Today an article, and it stated that of the activity of bullying in our schools is the same 10% of the kids who typically are bullied. And it's not to place any blame on the victim, but they began to study this, and they found out one of the overwhelming characteristics of the student who is bullied is lack of confidence. And what happens is, if a bully can sense a lack of confidence, they'll move in. And it's the same way with our young people. Oftentimes, predators want to find out who is it that has low self-esteem. And it may come in the form of a flattering statement to a young lady or to a young man. But to a young lady, "That's a nice jacket you have on." And that young woman's response would dictate whether or not, it would determine whether or not that predator will pursue or move on to somebody else. If perhaps that person says, "Well, thank you very much," and overwhelmed by that flattery, opportunity to pursue. That person just get lost, move on to the next person. We must know then that there are certain things that a predator will anticipate or look for. A young person who is struggling with challenges at home, if there's tensions in the home, if there's divorce or alcoholism or drug abuse in the home, if there's neglect, we must know what places our children at risk. We must know what the common lures are. And how do we know what those lures are? Because they're working every day in America. And I remember playing in the NFL, and I found out NFL stands for not for long. And I remember playing, and I remember our coach telling us every time someone scored on us, they always, or had a big game or a big gain, they would say, every successful team comes back to a successful play. And that was true. If there was ever a big play, then that team is going to run that play again. Now, they may not have the same formation. Instead of strong left, it might be strong right, and it may be different personnel. In my first year in the league, I saw 110 different offensive formations, but every team will come back to successful play. And we find out and we understand that there's certain lures that work. And guess what? Predators will come back to those same lures. And there are a number of them. I'm just going to share a few of them with you, and as you browse the tables and do your own study, you'll come across many of the others. I have an acronym. I call it PABACA, P-A-B-A-C-A. The P stands for the pet lure. And many of these I'm probably sure you've already heard. Take advantage of a young person's affinity for a pet or to find a missing pet. There's the affection lure. An affection lure is that a familiarity with someone who's close to them or someone that they know, and they begin to trust them, and then their trust is manipulated. The bribery lure, that you can get a gift or a toy or an animal or even money. The assistance lure. Can you help me with this? Can you hold this door for me? Can you help me carry this into the house? And our young people need to know, our students need to know that an adult should ask another adult for help. And the best thing that a student can do is just ignore and keep walking. The companion lure. You know, we have boundaries in the lives of our young people. And I put boundaries in the lives of my children. But if there's an adult who comes along, who takes away those boundaries, and their place is a place where you can play, and there are games and everything you want, they build this companionship, this friendship with young people, and consequently, they become victims. The authority lure. And as I said, there are a number of them, but oftentimes persons in authority will intimidate our young people, and you better not tell, or if you do, this will be the consequence. So we must know, we must prepare, and we prepare by rehearsing responses with our young people. We prepare by preparing our homes. I insisted with my children as they're growing up that if we're going to be on the internet, it's going to be a public atmosphere, it's going to be a public place, a common area, not public, but a common area in our homes. And I'm amazed at the students who can go in their room and lock their door and get on the internet. Because you never know who you're talking to on the internet. Prepare your home, even when it comes to TV. And I remember one day, I just had to make an exclamation in our own home. This program, we're not going to watch this program anymore. We were watching a certain program, and the language that was coming through that television in our home, it created an atmosphere that wasn't consistent with what I was trying to train my family and my daughters to, and how I wanted them to live. So I said, we're not going to watch that program. We need to be proactive about the lives of our children, what they're watching, what they're listening to, and just because the network sounds to be safe, the reality is there are certain messages that are coming the way of our young people that we wouldn't agree with. You know, there's an interesting study. I'm going to share this and say just one other thing in terms of our response, and I'll be done. But it's very interesting that 40 years ago, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, top-rated shows for our young people, the tweens, the 9 to 12-year-olds, highlighted themes such as community feeling, benevolence, and tradition. And out of 16 themes, fame ranked 13th or lower every year, except the last year. Now fame is number one. And it's interesting that the theme of fame, number one value that's being pumped into the hearts and lives of our young people, and our young people come to a point where they're seeing all of these other young people on television becoming reality stars and not having the skill or the work ethic to make it happen. And we have young people who aspire to have recognition. How do we respond? We respond by celebrating our young people. And, you know, I'm going to say this. You know, I'm very proud of my daughters, and I have 2 beautiful daughters, and I have one daughter who is doing very well in track. And guess what I do? I tape her races. I take pictures of her, and I talk about how proud I am. I celebrate her. And on Facebook, I celebrate her with my other friends so they can see, look at what my daughter is doing. And she happens to be here. I'm not even going to look at her. We have to find ways to celebrate our young people so they don't end up in a spot where they're trying to crave attention somewhere else. We have to find a way to congratulate our young people. We have to find a way to esteem them. And there's one thing that I do with my daughters. I tell them all the time, look Daddy in the eye, girlfriend, you are beautiful. You are so fine. I tell my daughters that every time, every day. I want them to know that because some young women never hear it. And the first wrong thing that comes along and says the right things, they make all the bad decisions. So I tell my daughters every day, girl, you are pretty. You are so pretty. So when the first little raggedy something come dragging up on one of my daughters, can't even put a sentence together. You know how they do? Yeah, girl. Yeah, what's up? Yeah, girl, you look good. Yeah. My daughter's going to be like, hello, subject, predicate. Can you make a sentence? See, some girls would be like, I look good. Are you talking to me or her? Me or you really think I look? Stop playing. You play too. I look good or her? My daughter going to be like, I look good. My daddy tell me that every day. What else you got to offer me? I know I look good. I want my daughters to know that they are special. And that doesn't mean that I can insulate them from all the bad messages out there. But you know what I choose to do? I choose to talk about those messages with them. Because I want them to be informed, and I want them to be prepared, and I want them to dream. I want them to dream about making great things happen in their own lives and be able to recognize the lures of those who will attempt to get them to sabotage their future and their destiny. We have to listen to our young people. And as I said, I travel and speak quite a bit around America, and it's amazing. There's so many young people who think I'm hip. They think I'm cool. I'm not. I just listen to my daughters and their friends very carefully. I hear what's going on. I try to understand their world. And when I make references to their world, and I know about their apps that they're using, and I know about how they're using social media, and I just choose to use that to win. And I use social media with my daughters. I leverage it. And my daughter can attest to you today. I'm not going to ask her to do it and put her on the spot because she'll hurt me later. But I send random text messages to my daughters. I use social media. I was thinking about you today. I'm hoping you're having a great day. Love you. She even taught me how to use emoticons. And I can put all kind of faces and symbols, emojis. I'm learning. What's an emoticon? I just made that word up. I hope you become one of those parents. You are one of those parents active in the lives of your young people. I hope you're educating yourself on what it takes to create a safe environment in your home. And I hope you are esteeming your children. And I want to leave you with something that I came up with. I simply call it CHARGE. And I tell this to young ladies all the time. I speak to young men quite often. I have another acronym for them, but CHARGE, C-H-A-R-G-E. And I tell that young lady, whoever you're dating or whoever you're around, understand something. They must understand the meaning of CHARGE. What does CHARGE mean? Cherish me, honor me, adore me, respect me, for I am God's expression. If he can't roll like that, he ain't the one. And I'm saying if they know that, they set a standard for what they will accept in life and what they will not accept, because they know who they are. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Patty Wetterling. Patty is the director of the Sexual Violence Prevention Program at the Minnesota Department of Health and served as the program administrator for the Teen Dating Violence Prevention Grant. She has 24 years of experience in sexual violence prevention, advocacy, and prevention education. She helped to create and oversee the Minnesota State Plan to prevent sexual violence and the exploitation, with oversight of all the committees organized to advance the plan. In 2012, Patty was elected as the chair of the board for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Please welcome Patty Wetterling.
That was powerful. Thank you. I got involved in this not because I thought this was a really good topic or really something that I've always been interested in. I got engaged in child protection when my son Jacob was kidnapped. It basically turned our world upside down, and I'd venture to guess that it in many ways turned much of Minnesota upside down. And what I experienced at the very beginning was absolute fear. Parents had fear. They were so afraid to let their children go. They were so afraid to talk to their children. They didn't want to scare them. They didn't know what to say. And I started going out into communities everywhere to just calm people down, because fear is debilitating. Fear prevents you from moving at all. Fear prevents you from talking. Hope is empowering. Hope gives you the opportunity to believe in something better for your children. I love the need to dream and to believe in. And if we want to create a community that values its children, it is up to all of us to do that, and we have the means to do that. I got a chance to speak. I've been all over the country and into Canada and Europe, actually. And I will never forget being in Montreal and going to a radio program after this conference. And the taxi driver was absolutely wonderful. And after I did my interview, he asked me, "So why were you here?" And I explained to him that my son was kidnapped and I was talking on child safety. And he just looked at me and he said, "Why? Why would anybody do such a thing? Why?" And he was just appalled. Why? And, with basically tears streaming down my face, I said, I don't know. But what I loved about that man is his absolute horror and passion. Why? Why would anybody take a child? Why would anybody enslave a child? Why would anybody force sex onto a child? Why? We should all be that angry, because it is up to us to say, you cannot do that, and here's a better way. And I think that it is the responsibility of parents. We need to talk to our children, and it doesn't have to be scary. It has to be part of their normal development, telling them they're special. That is funny. Did you read my notes? I had 4 things that I always told every group of parents. Number 1, Every child is special. Well, they need to be told that all the time. The number one lure is not money, and it's not candy, and it's not pets. Really, the number one lure is attention, affection. Kids want to be loved. They want to be cared for. They want to know that they are special. We need to tell them that every day, not just as parents, but as community. We need to build a community that values its children and find places for them to contribute. The second thing is no one has the right to hurt you, physically or sexually. We need to tell kids that and keep communications up so that if something does happen, that they will have permission to talk to you. There's a book Gavin DeBecker wrote on the gift, protecting the gift. And he claims that we all have this kind of gift inside of us of that sort of uh-oh feeling or knowing. Somebody you meet that you really like and you can connect with, or there's times when you meet somebody that it just doesn't feel right. There's something kind of icky. And it's starting at very young ages. We need to talk to our kids about that feeling. Trust that feeling. Talk to me if somebody makes you feel, that uh-oh feeling. It's a communication thing, and it starts at very young ages. People ask me all the time, when do you start talking to your kids about personal safety? As soon as a child is old enough to articulate a sentence, they're old enough to understand about who they are and knowing they're special and knowing their bodies. And kids, yes, they do get it. They love heads, shoulders, knees, and toes, but even they know there's body parts in between. And I have read, this is important, those who prey on children will walk away from somebody who knows the names of body parts because they know those parents have had a talk and that those kids are more likely to come forward if something bad were to happen. So it's really important that we start at young ages and communicate with our children to let them know that their bodies are theirs and there's privacy and that they have the right to speak up and to tell you if someone makes them feel or do things that they don't like. If they do have that happen, they need to know it's not their fault. And the fourth thing is to tell someone. It is the secret that allows these problems to go on and on. And with trafficking, these kids are often lured by the affection lure. Somebody who likes them very much and wants, they'll be your boyfriend, they'll be your best friend, and they nurture the very vulnerable aspect of being a youth. And that's something that we can't make it easy for them to do. We need to have these kids know they're connected to community, and many kids come from families that don't have two caring adults sitting there at home waiting for them to have a really nice dinner and talk about things. So you can be the caring adult in another child's life. You can be a caring adult that, as a parent, you're going to see your children's friends. And I remember when I was in high school and my girlfriend Holly was going to run away. It was really bad at her home and she was going to run away. And I talked her into coming to my house because I knew my mom could take care of her. I knew that Holly would talk to my mom and even tell her things that she wouldn't tell. Because she was embarrassed or ashamed, and there was drugs and there was some mental illness. And it's really important for all of us to extend that offer to children in our community. You can be that caring adult. One of the other things that I really think is important is to listen. So often we want to tell our kids everything that we know. Don't go home today and sit down with your kids and say, well, first they said this, and you can't do that, and be really careful, because we tend to do that. We want to impart all this knowledge, and I believe that it's not, especially with young children, it's not their job to not get kidnapped. It's not their job to not be victims of sexual molestation or inappropriate. It's our job to protect them. We can talk to them and we can communicate them, but we also need to watch who's watching our children. And as kids grow older, they will make mistakes. But if you can be that connection, you can ask them, what would you do if this happened to you or one of your friends? What would you do if you suspected one of your friends had a boyfriend that gave you that uh-oh feeling. And that happens. Kids often sense, it's like, she's changed. She doesn't want, I was in St. Cloud, and there was a commissioner who came and he said, whoa, my daughter played hockey. And she had a friend who had every red flag that you named. She gave up her old friends. She suddenly had new clothes. She was no longer interested in hockey. She didn't even so much care about school anymore. And one thing after another, and turns out she dropped out of school. She was being trafficked. And it was something that a lot of people knew about. Think about if one person might have said, can I help you? Do you need something? Are you in a safe place? It's really, you're going to hear from law enforcement. That can be a really big challenge because they are swept away often. And if we can get ahead of that, it doesn't have to be scary. I have a daughter who has 3-year-old twins. I have 2-year. I'm sorry, they're 3, yeah, twins, and they play a game. What makes you happy? They'll sit at anytime random during the day. What makes you sad? What makes you angry? It's funny because they're very different. And one of them was like, "What makes you sad?" And she's like, And the other one is like, when your doll breaks, when you lose your blanket, when you fall, one of them could think of everything. The other one is like, But you know what? It's important for kids to learn to verbalize emotions. Put a name to it. Something makes you scared. Something makes you angry or fearful or makes you feel bad. It's really important. I love your acronyms. I'm trying to think of how I can put some of mine into a better format. I remember shortly after Jacob's kidnapping that a reporter stuck a microphone in my face and said, "So, what makes Jacob so special? Kids have been kidnapped before him. They've been kidnapped since him. What makes Jacob so special?" Do you even believe that question? He's my son. He sneezes when he looks at the sun. He loves peanut butter. He's got a dog that he takes care of. He's responsible. He's the best big brother anybody could ever have. He's got dreams and hopes and potential. And I think that that's what the community needs to be mindful of. It is our job to build a community that values its children, and it's not that difficult. The Search Institute has a lot of information on developmental assets. What is a normal thing that a child will go through? What do they need to be successful? Mostly they need support throughout their lives. They need to feel empowered. They need to know what to do if certain situations arise. And as you said, Steve, many of them need practice. Give me an opportunity to think about that so the next time it happens, I would know what to do. They need boundaries. We did a lot of internet presentations, and when we talked to children, they were often, they would express that the internet was kind of scary. There's no boundaries out there. There's this great big old world where everything is okay. And they like boundaries. They may not tell you they like boundaries, but they do know how to operate with boundaries, and they need to know that they have a safety net, that there's somebody there who cares about that. They'll break them. My son, one night, his curfew was 1 o'clock, and 1 o'clock came and went. 1:30 came and went. 2 o'clock, he walks in the door, and I said, "Trevor, you know you're supposed to be in at 1 o'clock." And he said, "Yeah, but they changed the clocks back at 2 o'clock, so now it is only 1 o'clock. It was daylight savings time." And I was like, oh. All I could say was, it's a good thing you weren't 5 minutes earlier, or you would have been really late somehow. They will push the boundaries. They really try and test. What do I do with this? What do I do? That's all part of learning, and we need to respect that. We need to have them engaged in school. We need to have them engaged in after-school activities. The kids who are connected to community are less vulnerable. They need some values. They need to reflect. Kids, when I heard from children after Jacob's kidnapping, it was phenomenal. One time, this happened to me. I was molested by my babysitter. My dad's best friend came over, and this happened to me. And what they needed was somebody to listen. And we need to take away the stigma of sexual abuse and allow children and adults alike. I've met 65-year-old men who for the first time told of their victimization. It's not a secret. It's not their fault. And that we need to, as a public health problem, state this is the problem, this is what you got to do, and this is what we as a community will do. I would like to end with a vision that I think is really says quite a lot. Each second we live is a new and unique moment of the universe, a moment that never was before and never will be again. And what do we teach our children in school? We teach them that 2 and 2 makes 4 and that Paris is the capital of France. When will we also teach them what they are? We should say to each of them, do you know what you are? You are a marvel. You are unique. In all of the world, there is no other child like you. In the millions of years that have passed, there has never been a child like you. And look at your body, what a wonder it is, your legs, your arms, your cunning fingers, the way they move. You may become a Shakespeare, a Michelangelo, a Beethoven, a Denver Bronco. You have the capacity for anything. Yes, you are a marvel. And when you grow up, can you then harm another who is like you, a marvel? You must cherish one another. We must all work to make this world worthy for its children. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. One thing that dawns on me when you hear the repeated messages from these great speakers is the message. There are a lot of crossover and similarities, and I had a talk about 2 months ago in front of the UN and a lot of heads of state, and I told them that it was great because we all seem to know what the right answers are, but there is an obligation to reach out to people, and the resources are there. I mean, this organization was built to give it to you. These speakers are here to give you the information and the resource. So that's the only sad part of this is the information and the help to prevent it is here. We just have to take advantage of it. Our third speaker, a detective. He has been investigating human trafficking and sex trafficking crimes since 2000. He is currently the lead investigator in all human traffic cases at a local precinct. Sergeant Snyder works in close collaboration with the FBI and Homeland Security investigations, as well as a former task force officer with the FBI and the ATF. He is a member of the Minnesota statewide Human Trafficking Task Force, as well as the Metro Area Prostitution Collaboration Jury Vic Task Force. Please welcome Sergeant Grant Snyder.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk with you about sex trafficking. The work that I do, and I've specifically left out the name of my agency, although it wouldn't be that difficult for many of you to find out. I recognize a lot of people out there already know where I work. But I did that because I'm not here representing my agency. I'm not here as a police officer. I'm here as a man. I'm here as a father. I'm here as a member of the community. I'm here as a brother, a son, all of the people that play a role ultimately in changing the direction and the horrible course that unfortunately we're headed on right now. And so today my objectives are to increase your outrage and increase your passion. I've been fortunate enough to be able to speak across the country and teach cops as well as other professionals about sex trafficking, and it's been a real blessing for me because I've been able to see firsthand where I started from back 15 years ago when I had my first sex trafficking case. And back then, I was a street crimes officer working in one of the northern parts of the city, and we were doing a crack raid one night on a drug house, and those type of search warrants are violent, they're loud, they're intrusive. We, go inside, and everybody gets put down, and after SWAT had made the area code 4, which means it was all secure for us to come in, one of the SWAT guys said, hey, you got to come down and look at this downstairs. So I went down to the basement, and there in this little makeshift room in the corner of a damp, dark basement where there was dog feces along the wall, and it was wet, and there was garbage strewn about, was a mattress with no bed sheets or anything on it, sitting on the floor, and on this mattress was a little girl, and she looked like she was about 10 or 11 years old. In fact, she was 16 years old, I would later learn, and her name was Amanda. And Amanda was wearing nothing from the waist down. She had a white T-shirt on. She had a cut on her head with dried blood. She was dirty, and there were used condoms on the floor. There was a crack pipe nearby, and that's where Amanda was being sold. And I remember that night so vividly because back then we did what we always did when we ran into a kid like that. We picked her up, got her dressed, took her back to the precinct, cleaned her up at detox, and then we sent her home. And it wasn't but maybe 2 or 3 months later when I was doing a similar event at another drug house, and we kicked in another door, and I found Amanda again. And we pulled Amanda back out, took her down to the precinct, talked to her. And this would happen on 4 more occasions before she turned 18 years old. And on one of those dates, I said, Amanda, why do you keep coming here? I mean, she was from a little town on the shores of Lake Superior up north. I said, why do you keep coming back to this city? Why do you keep coming back here to be exploited like this? Why do you keep making me rescue you from the hands of these people that want to exploit you? And she said, why do you keep rescuing me? And I said, because I can't stand to see you be treated this way and abused. And she said, the single most important thing that any victim has ever said to me, she said, then don't send me home again. Amanda was a kid who had become the family plaything. Her mother had died some years ago, and her 2 older brothers and her father were abusing her almost ritualistically, and this had been going on since she was about 8 years old. And so Amanda, at 16 years old, did the only thing that she could do and the thing that any of us would do, and she got out. She got away. She ran away. She escaped that type of abuse. And this theme of Amanda being abused and us in our charge, which was my responsibility to protect this child, has played out again and again and again, and it has taught me of our substantial failure to do the very thing that we're supposed to be good at, and that's protecting these kids. And I'm not just talking about law enforcement, I'm talking about our community. When I think about how much work we have to do, and I reflect on in the evenings or the nights when I'm sitting there trying to wind down after a long day, I'm thinking about, boy, we've come a long way in the last 15 years. We didn't even call this sex trafficking back then. And I've rescued maybe 300 girls over the course of my career, pulling them out of bedrooms like that, or cars on traffic stops, or hotel rooms where they're in there alone wearing lingerie and things like that. I can't rescue enough kids or arrest enough perpetrators or investigate enough crimes to make an impact or an effective change in what we have to do. It's going to take every one of us. It's going to take every parent. It's going to take every teacher. It's going to take every politician. It's going to take every law enforcement officer around the country to be able to impact this, because what we're dealing with here is a socialization, is our cultural sexuality of tolerance about this kind of stuff. Think about, if you will, the pervasiveness, and Steve talked about earlier, what the internet has done to kids' exposure to pornography. And I'm not here to talk to you about the evils of pornography, but I will tell you that every one of the nearly 1,000 men that I've arrested over the course of my career, every one that would talk to me has told me that their journey to that hotel room started with pornography. Every single one. Now, when people tell me that, and I hear that 1,000 times, I start to believe that's probably true. We live in a world that accepts some parts of what puts our children on a collision course with being exploited. I come here today with this idea that sex trafficking is preventable, that there's something we can do about it, that we can make a change, okay? Otherwise, I wouldn't waste my time, and I would sit at home and watch television or play with the kids or whatever. But we can do something about this, and I'll tell you right now, for all the men in the room and all the women in the room that know men, this is a problem with male behavior. This is a problem with men. Make no mistake, I've never arrested a woman for buying an underage girl for sex, ever. Not one time. I've arrested women for trafficking underage girls, but the demand side of this problem is all men. It's easy for us to think about it in those terms and think about, well, that's a simple solution. If men wouldn't buy sex, we wouldn't have young girls being trafficked in a hotel room or Amanda's being held in a basement. Sex trafficking is about slavery. There's an audio clip that usually I play here, but I took it out because I didn't know what the audience was going to be like today. But the reality of it is, if you talk to enough victims and you sit across the table from enough of them and you hear their stories and you share their tears and you let them tell you in an unshameful setting where they get to say what they've been through, you'll hear things that will make your stomach turn and will make you wonder how in the world they ever made it through that alive. Because this is about bondage, it's about slavery, it's about being taken someplace and being told to do something, and I'll tell you a couple of stories about that in a second. Let me just give you a quick definition of, this is based on the TVPA, which is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is what our legal authority to enforce these crimes is based upon. Sex trafficking is a commercial sex act, okay, that is conducted or induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced has not attained 18 years of age yet. Now, in Minnesota law, we took out those words, force, fraud, and coercion. Even though we know that they're there typically, it becomes a barrier for us to prove that sometimes. And so I feel really good about where we're at in this state to be able to legally do something about this by charging the people that are responsible for it. And I just wanted to give you some sort of a baseline so you know what you're talking about. Okay? We're talking about the problem. Can you guys hear me? Okay. We're talking about the problem. The average age of entry into prostitution right now in this country is between 12 and 14 years of age. That is shocking. Coming from a guy that's got a 12-year-old son, that's got a 13-year-old daughter, has another 14-year-old daughter, that's the age at which the average age at which children are getting started in prostitution. And believe me, I've talked to enough 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds to know that that's true. Victims of sex trafficking may suffer as many as 30 or more sexual assaults per day. This is not an isolated incident of a bad experience that happens one time and then they move on from that. Most of the victims that I've talked to, that I've rescued, were trafficked for an average of 2 weeks. During that period of time, these young women were expected to perform 30 to 40 acts of commercial sex per day. Think about that. Think about what we know right now about a single act of sexual assault in the life of a female, an adult woman. Just one. Think about all the trauma, the life-changing event that is, how that reshapes the way that they think about themselves and about how they feel safety and about the world around them. And now multiply all that by 50, by 200, by 1,000. And that's what that experience, that's what that victim, the trauma that goes into that victim experience is all about. Victims of sex trafficking are largely the most vulnerable members of our population. These are kids that oftentimes are drawn into it, like Steve and Patty talked about, because of situations in their life where they don't feel connected. They don't feel beautiful. For example, some of the risk factors include poverty. We can't separate the significance of poverty to the realities of sex trafficking, particularly juvenile sex trafficking. Chronic absenting and runaway behavior. If I had one big thing I was going to point to when I go across the country and I talk about cops, and I'll talk to people to say, we don't have that in our community, we don't have that in our police department. If you have runaways, I guarantee you have sex trafficking. Because we know that up to 75% of runaways report that within the first 24 hours of being on the run, their approach to engage with an enticement to engage in either sex trafficking or sex trading, okay? Survival sex. History of sexual assault or sexual abuse in childhood. About 90 to 95% of our victims report their first sexual experience being a sexual assault or sexual abuse in childhood. Social isolation, chemical dependency, or mental illness. These are factors, I apologize, I advanced too soon. These are factors that predispose a child, and they're embedded within a whole array of other negative child experiences, but they set a child on the fringes and make them more vulnerable to who's going to come along and introduce them to this idea of, just like Steve said, hey baby, you're beautiful. I've never seen anybody this beautiful before, okay? Strategies that pimps and traffickers are going to use to lure them in. Human trafficking is often more lucrative and less risky than other forms of criminal activity. $32 billion in annual revenues. This is the second largest, number 2 illicit, most profitable illicit enterprise in the world, second only to the global narcotics trade. Ladies and gentlemen, that's an unbelievable amount of money. And less law enforcement resources are typically brought to bear. In the city that I work, on any given day, we may have 75 people that work in narcotics. We have 2 that are working trafficking, only 2. I talked about it before, I'll say it again. The real cornerstone of our preventive approach to this is to get with men and have men take responsibility and finally live up to our obligation to change this. Because if we can get men to not go to those hotel rooms, if we can break that cycle of profitability and change that so that the guy that's willing to put a young woman in a hotel room and put an ad on Backpage, which I'll show you in a couple of minutes, if we can break that cycle so they don't make money, they won't come back. They won't traffic a young girl. They won't put her in a room if they're not going to make any money. The only reason people do this is because it puts money in their pocket. Let's talk about the victims real quickly. Many of you saw this story about Bobby, and I apologize to say that Bobby would love to have come today. She had planned on it, but she ran into some personal issues lately. She was planning on coming down here so she could stick up her hand and wave and say, "Hi, I'm Bobby." Bobby's an amazing young girl, and she's very, very typical of the type of girls that we end up rescuing from sex trafficking. She was a little girl that at 16 years old, I first came in contact with her. I pulled her out of a house up in North Minneapolis. It was a Saturday morning. I'd been tracking her for about a week. Finally, I got a good hit on her phone. We went to this place. We kicked in the door, and there she was sitting on this bed on the floor with another girl. And we pulled Bobby out. Bobby had 4 different drugs on board: heroin, cocaine, methamphetamines, and ecstasy. And we pulled her out. We took her down. She was at detox for, I think, 3 days at the hospital coming off of all that. Bobby has become one of my true heroes in all of this because she's struggling. She's not only struggled with fetal alcohol syndrome and the other things like that, but Bobby didn't come from a disorganized home. She didn't come from a single-parent family. She was adopted at an early, young age by 2 very loving an aunt and uncle, so she had a very organized home. She spent time in church. She was involved in sports. She was doing well in school. And then around the age of 14 years old, something changed, and Bobby got raped while she was at high school by 2 boys. And that set her on a collision course with a sense of shame and social isolation because she never told anybody about it. And next thing that turned into was, who was she accepted by? She was accepted by people that were involved in drugs and alcohol. And that led Bobby further down kind of this black hole toward her own sense of social isolation and worthlessness. And when I rescued Bobby, after we pulled her out and we got her cleaned up and she was able to talk to me about her experience, she talked very vividly about how broken she felt she was, how she was so broken and so destroyed and so dirty, she would never be able to make it back to where she needed to be a normal part of society. And I'm going to tell you right now, when Bobby talks about the heroism that went in to save her, and she points to people and said, you know, you're a hero, the police are my heroes because they saved me. There's heroes in this, but they don't wear a badge. They wear scars, okay? The true heroes in sex trafficking prevention and in the work that we do in combating it are the victims themselves, because they have the singular ability to see what's gone wrong and to make a change and to protect others. Okay, this is a trafficking timeline I use to train cops. I'm going to throw it up here for you because I want you to see it. We focus, do I have a little laser on this? I do. We focus right here. Cops, community. We look at one thing, we look at the exploitation, we get tunnel vision about that. We think about that Backpage ad, it's about that kid in that hotel room. There's a whole array of other things we need to pay attention to because all along this train are things that we can do to interrupt that process. You've got right up here, we've got a vulnerability exists. Okay, let's say that you've got a young girl who's 15 years old, and when she walks around with her friends, she's walking behind them because she doesn't feel worthy. She doesn't feel pretty. Maybe she's never had a boyfriend before. Nobody will talk to her. They don't think that she's beautiful. Now she's got somebody that's 27 or 28 years old that drives a nice car, wears nice clothes, spends money, buys her things, and comes up to her and says, you know what, you're the most beautiful woman that I've ever seen. You don't have to be a part of this anymore just because they don't understand you. What? You don't have to listen to your parents. You don't have to go to school. Is she going to fall into that? In many cases, she does. The stage has already been set. She already feels worthless. She already feels unwanted and unacceptable and unlovable. okay? We need to pay attention to that because that's an extremely critical part of this timeline and where that begins. And then the seduction and coercion, this idea of introduction to trafficking, the marketing, I don't have to go through everything, but the reality of it is we need to start looking at this whole timeline that the victim experiences. Okay, of that victim experience is characterized by a number of different things. This high level of trauma, we already kind of talked about that. Shame, this poor outlook for the future. I can't tell you how many girls have sat across that table from me and said, after all these things that have happened to me, nobody's ever going to want me. No man's ever going to want to be with me. No boy's ever going to want to date me. Nobody's ever going to want to marry me, okay? And they look to us to help them define whether or not that's accurate. That's why when I tell cops, you're going to sit across the table and have somebody tell you the worst possible thing you're ever going to have heard about being exploited by a number of different men and the trauma and the horror and all the things that went into that. And if your reaction is to go and recoil, you're going to lose them because they're not going to talk to you anymore. And as a community, we need to think about that because one of the most beautiful things we can do for these victims and these kids, when we bring them back into our embrace after they've been rescued, is to assure them, this wasn't you, okay? Sure, you made bad choices. Sure, you ran away. But nothing that you did caused you to deserve to be sold, to be changed into, gone from being a human being to be changed into a dollar bill. And it's pretty typical that I don't have any money, so today the fact that I have $2 shouldn't really shock anyone. I've got 5 kids and a 5-foot-tall Irish wife that I'm afraid of, so I generally don't have any money at all. Isolation, another very critical part of the victim experience. This compassionate trauma bond with pimp, one of the big things that people ask me, why do victims keep going back to the pimp? It's a very challenging thing to deal with, but we see it time and time again, and it's because this trauma builds a compassionate bond with that pimp. It builds something that it's very difficult, and so one of our first and most important things that we do when we rescue these victims is we try and drive a wedge between them, and we do that very strategically early on by trying to bring them into partnership with us, because many of the girls that we pull out won't talk about their pimp right away. They may talk about them 6 months down the road, but right now they're not interested in doing that. So there's some strategies that we take to try and do that. And then fear and poor peer and family support. It's very challenging as much as it is for us to hear those stories. Imagine how difficult it is for families to hear stories about what's happened to their daughter. Okay, this is Bernard Morris. I'm going to use this as a case study real quick. Bernard was a pimp that he's a Jamaican national that was an overstay in the United States, and he was living down in South Minneapolis. Bernard was running a brothel out of his house down on 3rd Avenue for about 3 years, and it escaped the notice of the police department. Now, Bernard is currently incarcerated, so I have no issue putting his picture up there, but I want to tell you a little bit about what brought us to this. Bernard, when we finally got on this case, it was through a young 14-year-old Native American girl who had been running away and who, the place where she was staying, they were very concerned she was involved in street-level prostitution. And so we were trying to find her, we were trying to talk to her. Finally, one day I get a call from her probation officer. She's coming in today, so we went in, we met up with her, talked to her, and she sat there and told me just so matter-of-factly about everything that had happened to her in her life. She talked about how her mom, she had been living in South Dakota, and her mom got arrested for armed robbery and sent to prison, so she came here to live with her dad, and her dad had all kinds of health issues, and he was very chemically dependent, and he was smoking crack in their house, and so she started running away for half a day at a time, a couple of days at a time. He never reported any of it, and into that she fell into this group of men that met her out on the street and started offering her money for prostitution. And one of those guys was a guy that worked at McDonald's down on Lake and 2nd, and he brought her over to his house several times over the course of a year prior to me meeting her. But she met with Bernard because what Bernard would do is he would drive up and down Lake Street in his van, and he would go up to that girl that looked like she was cold, looked like she was hungry, looked like she was lonely, and he'd pull up and say, hey, do you want to sit in my van? It's raining out, you look cold, warm up in here. Do you need a place to sleep? That coat looks old, do you want me to give you a new coat? Do you want to get high? Do you want to get drunk? Something like that. And that was his deal on how he did it. So what happened was Bernard would bring him over to his house in South Minneapolis, and then he would let him stay there for a couple of days, and within a couple of days he would introduce this idea of survival sex, where he'd say, you know what, you can stay here. I'll give you food, I'll give you clothes, you can live here, but you got to give me something in exchange. And it was always sex that he was looking for in exchange. And once he'd get them to cross that bridge, then he would encourage them, you know what, if you did this with other guys, you could make some money at it. And that's how he ran his operation. And Bernard had built a network of about 25 to 30 guys that he would then call, and they would come over and pay him and go have sex with these girls. And the little girl that we rescued was just one of about 8 girls that we were able to identify that he was trafficking out of his house. I want to play an audio for you that's an intercepted phone call. Can we play that audio?
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, you call my phone?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Who is this?
This is Tom.
Oh, Tom.
Hey, Lee just called me. Did you call Lee?
Yeah, I did.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I heard you say you have someone new.
Yeah, a little white girl.
All right. So can I come over about what time is it now? 5:30?
Yeah.
Can I come about 6:30?
I'll call you back when I'm getting there.
Okay. Oh, you're not home yet?
No.
Oh, okay.
How much you wanna pay?
Well, I have to see before I know, because I don't know.
She's
what.
pretty. She wants 100.
Oh well, if that worth that much, sometimes it's not worth nothing. It's really hard to say, If it's worth it, yeah.
You'll pay 75?
Yeah. If it's worth it, I say.
So you want me to tell her?
Yeah.
Or you gonna tell her yourself? Since I never do that.
Did that matter? Does it matter whether you tell or I tell?
Yeah, because that's going to determine whether or not she want to come over.
Oh, yeah. 75. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, tell her 75 and I'll stop by, okay?
Yeah, she said, if you want, she's 15.
I don't want to get trouble.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Then no trouble.
No, I don't care about, the age. I care about the look.
She pretty.
Yeah, that's all I care about. I don't care about,
Okay,
You
you
don't
killed
care
that
about
audio.
the age?
No.
Okay. And I'm going to end with this, but I needed you to hear that because that's a real live intercepted conversation between two real people. There's no actors, there's no scripting. That's two men talking about a 15-year-old girl that's a real person and talking about buying and selling her the same way you talk about buying and selling a bike or a refrigerator or tires for your car or something like that. And that's what this looks like. And just so you know, the patron on the other end of that, the Asian guy, had absolutely no criminal history. He had never been arrested. He hadn't gotten so much as a traffic ticket. He was a 52-year-old guy from Egan who had a 15-year-old daughter that lived with him, okay? He was a successful upper middle class male, employed, educated, just like 99 and 9/10% of these guys are. They're not sociopaths and sex addicts. They're people just like me. And it's important for us to recognize that, because if we're going to make an impact, that's where we need to turn our attention, guys, to where we're going to target the stuff we're doing is by hitting these guys and get them not to pick up that phone and call Backpage, okay? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Grant. Now I'd like to call the other speakers back up onto the stage, as well as our panelists, and I will introduce the panelists as they walk up. So would everyone come and take a seat? Carrie Schaff has been Anoka Hennepin's McKinney-Vento District Homeless Liaison since July 2011 and was the founding board member at Hope for Youth, the Anoka County Drop-Off Center for youth experiencing homelessness. She has spent over 16 years advocating for youth and their families and continued to work hard to build a continuum of support services and awareness throughout our community for the youth experiencing homelessness. Carrie, would you raise your hand so everybody knows who you are? Thank you. Cynthia Gill. Cynthia, please raise your hand. Cynthia works as a licensed family therapist at Northland Counseling in Chanhassen and is an adjunct instructor at the Adler Graduate School and a published author of the book Jumpstarting Boys. She speaks in a variety of settings, especially in parenting issues and healing victims of trauma. Donna McDonald. Donna is a licensed social worker. By the way, my mother was a social worker. 35 years. With over 15 years experience in child, family, mental health, and currently works as a violent prevention coordinator for the Anoka County Community Health Department. During her career, she has worked with parents, public and private services, schools, juvenile probation, and community action teams. And lastly, Sheriff Jim Stewart. It's hard to pick out. Jim is a former Marine, a graduate of St. Mary's University and the National Sheriff's Institute. He is committed to the development of our youth and community partnerships. He's a member of the Minnesota Domestic Violence Committee. We're excited to have all these speakers here. I'm going to start off with a question, just because I'm curious. With everything going on here, I want to know, and since we're in Anoka County, what is Anoka County doing to battle this program or this problem?
Well, we have a history over the years of working closely with Sergeant Snyder and some of the other groups that he had mentioned. I can say that after taking office a little over 3 years ago now, one of our detectives approached me and said, Sheriff, I need 15 minutes of your time, and I want to tell you about a real-life problem that's alive and well in Anoka County that we need to address. And that's exactly where he went, was talking about sex trafficking. And since that time, I've made a concerted effort to try and learn more about it and educate myself, and this has become one of our priorities within our office. And so I'm happy to say that in a pretty short period of time, we have a program we take out and we speak to a large number of groups, whether it's Lions, Kiwanis, Rotary, et cetera, with civic and community groups. We have begun working with school liaison officers and school resource officers across Anoka County to help them understand what to look for and how they can take a more proactive role in intervention. We have also partnered with many local community groups. Currently, we have been in the planning phase for our own community forum with the Anoka-Hennepin School District, and we will be presenting a community forum on May 29th at the Coon Rapids High School at 6 p.m. We have also, knowing that it's a real challenge from a resource standpoint, as Sergeant Snyder said, one quick example, we had a case that we had been working recently in which 2 detectives were working full-time plus on one case for over 8 months, because these cases often travel across multiple, not just city and county borders, but state borders as well, and the number of warrants, et cetera, it takes. So long story short, we know it's a real drain on resources that we simply don't have to combat this as effectively as we want. So what we did was we reached out to our local police departments and said, if we train some of your detectives, some of your team, as we identify these large-scale incidents, would you be willing to partner with us in developing an Anoka County ad hoc, human trafficking task force? And all the chiefs that were able said, yes, we're on board. And so we have since ramped that up. We've begun training on a broader scale. We continue to do our community outreach, and we will continue to make this, one of our top priorities.
Thank you.
Can I chime in, Tony?
Yes.
Those of you that know me know I have a hard time staying quiet, so I have to chime in. I am Carrie Schaff. I'm the District Homeless Liaison for Anoka-Hennepin Schools. And we talked a little bit about the vulnerable population, so I want to talk about my numbers at the school district. So I'm Anoka-Hennepin, so it doesn't include Spring Lake Park, just Anoka-Hennepin, District 11. And Friday when I left work, we had 826 students identified throughout my school district as experiencing homelessness. And of that 826, 181 of them are unaccompanied youth. So those are youth who have ran away, been kicked out, lost home to foreclosure, so maybe they've been doubling up and then they're couch hopping and engaging in survival sex, you name it. So of just my school district, I've got 181 students who are unaccompanied youth. So they're very vulnerable. And in the school district, we're trying to do trainings. Within each one of my schools, I have a homeless lead. So they're trained on sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, to watch for the warning signs. We have opened Hope for Youth, first of its kind homeless youth drop-in center a year ago, and we now have outreach workers that are out in the community looking for these young people, and they are trained to be able to notice warning signs. So we're working collaboratively with our faith partners, with nonprofits, and with law enforcement to make sure we can identify and try to get to these young people before, but then to pay attention to the warning signs where we can intervene and work collaboratively with the community to help these young people.
Thank you. I believe we have a question here, and you're next. And please introduce yourself and feel free to address the team.
Hi, I'm Arnold James, and I'm originally from the Virgin Islands. Kristen's my wife. I have one interesting comment. In the state of Minnesota, if you shoot a deer out of season, they take away everything that's related to that crime. We have financial struggles. Why can't we, I saw the end of your graph that said there's a financial benefit. How come we're not hitting them in the financial benefit? That is the first thing. And when I was a little boy, I had all female babysitters. 7 of the 9 women that babysat me molested me. So when I heard you say that men are the problem, the issue is, I know boys my age who'd all gone through that experience. It messed me up real bad. But like you, I had a 5 foot, no, she ain't 5 foot, she's 4'11", a mother who scared the dickens out of me. So I never went on the other side. But when I worked corrections, I ran into all these men that had the same problem. And I'm wondering, what's the connection between those men being touched and then them turning around and touching others? My wife has helped me with some of that. My wife's an amazing woman, and I only got dragged into this because she made a correlation between domestic violence and human trafficking. So I was a sounding board, and she'd say things, and I'm like, I went through that, I went through that, I went through that. So what is the correlation? And what are we doing to stop? Because I honestly believe it is a male problem when they become an adult, but our culture fantasizes the idea that a man's manhood is attached to how many women he can trick, coerce, talk into. We call it game, but it's not a game.
And thank you for your question.
So, that's my question.
And your candidness. I just don't want too many questions so that we can address each one. Who's going to take the first part of it?
I'll talk about the financial benefit aspect to that. You know, there are laws on the books right now in Minnesota. There's civil law that patrons can be held financially responsible for victims that they've exploited. Typically, when people talk about taking away the financial benefit, that generally they think about, you know, attaching the assets of the trafficker themselves. But the biggest impact will be if we start using those civil laws to be able to go after men that are actually trafficking these men or these girls and boys. And I know there's a number of lawyers that are looking at that. They just did a civil case through the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis where they held somebody accountable for that. And I don't have all the details on that, but it's something that's being looked at really hard. So those opportunities exist for us to do something about that financially.
I want to thank you for bringing up a huge component of it. I work with the health department to prevent sexual violence, and the very first goal we have is to address the cultural environment that accepts sexual harmful behavior. We nurture it. We give points in video games to go in there and sexually exploit others. You get points for that, and then we're upset when youth go ahead and do that. So it's really going to take a shift, and I think it's going to take all of us to. We've been so conditioned to accept what used to be pornography, that you'd sneak behind your parents' back and look at, is now mainstream media. And we should not support that. You know, when we speak up and call the station and say, you know, these ads are offensive or this programming is wrong, they know that you're representing thousands of people who never bother to make that call. And if we don't buy it, they're going to quit doing it. So it's going to be a combination. I saw a T-shirt at a pharmacy one time in a little blue onesie for a little infant. It said, "Lock up your daughters, here I come." You know, that is not the environment that we want. That's not the mindset that we want. And until we address sexual assault of children is wrong, it's always wrong. And give boys also permission to come forward and say, you know, this isn't right. But we live in a culture that kind of encourage. I have many stories about this. There was a TV reporter who went to the prison and asked all of these perpetrators of sexual harm if they were victims. And most of them said yes, they were victimized as children. One of them said no, and they finally got to the point, well, when did you have your first sexual experience? He was 8. But he never viewed himself as a victim. He was an early developer. And we have this thing for boys and male victims that they're supposed to like it. If a teacher assaults them, they're supposed to like, they're lucky. Everybody would want that teacher. And it's really, really, really harmful, and it causes us great harm from a public health standpoint and relationship-wise. Everybody loses. So thank you for addressing that. I'm usually the voice that speaks up for the boys, and I neglected to do that, but it's really, really critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
I work with health too, and we're charged really with the prevention. And I was listening today. I was thinking of Dr. David Walsh, who says, "Whoever tells the stories defines the culture." And in some ways, we are swimming, like Patty said, upstream with the whole aspect of the media and the messages that gives our children as to what is a successful man or a successful woman. And I think our charge is for us all to start telling the stories, not only to our own children, but the children in our neighborhoods, the children in our circle of influence. One of the main things they say, the biggest piece that can be there for a child who may be in a situation that is harmful is that they have a trusted adult they can go to. And they say they should have 5 trusted adults in case the first 2 or third one fails them. So it's really all of our role. When we talk about this, we just did a child abuse prevention documentary with North Metro. And when we talk about this, we say it's a community problem. It requires community to fix the problem, and it's all of us. It just takes one of us to make the difference for that child.
Thank you. This way.
I am passionate about training parents to communicate with their children and to be safe so that their children will communicate with them. Because the parents are the first line, like what has been said today. So I think we need to have parent organizations, parenting education. We need to help parents to learn how to be safe for their children, not to talk at them, not to enter into power struggles with them, but to really work with their children in a better way. So I have a lot of ideas for that.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Mickey. I hail from Mounds View, and this has bothered me for a long, long time. People talk about the media and how all this sexual stuff is coming across on television, movies, and so on, but one area they fail to address is radio. What I'm referring to mostly is rock music. And I don't know how many parents actually listen to what their kids have been hearing, but it's very shocking, actually. I'm very highly concerned about these kids growing up right now because I have literally heard things that would curl your hair on rock music. And almost the majority of it is glorification of the sex act, actually. And some of it was so graphic, I wondered how, where's their censors? How can they put this stuff on? And how parents, if they're listening at all, can let their children hear these things. Because me, as a 64-year-old woman, it shocked me, So I'm wondering, with this stuff that's on the radio right now, how are you supposed to know who to contact and, get them to censor these things before it really messes up the fabric of our society and our youth? Because it's pretty bad.
So to simplify the question, maybe is public radio or the radio giving poor messaging to our kids? What roles do parents have to monitor what their kids are listening to? And as a society, is there anything we can do to make it less accessible to our children?
I would just add, as a voice of speak of a parent, and I think, Steve, you talked about it before, it's just having that dialogue and that communication with your kids. So yes, you can connect directly with record companies, radios, to address it that way, but I think it's so critical. We have to be talking to our young people, our own children. If you're in the faith community, if you're a teacher, having open dialogue. Maybe that's where I got my curly hair from. I listened to some very explicit lyrics with my son, who's now 21, but whenever he would get CDs or put things on his iPod, we sat down and had a little listening party. And boy, did we have some great dialogue. I, too, was shocked. And then also watching some of the music videos that aligned with these songs were very pornographic, in my opinion. So I think having that open conversation and being comfortable enough to have real honest dialogue. And just like, TV shows or movies or video games, there's always someone you can go to and follow up with your concerns. But I think we really have to step back and be able to have those honest conversations with our children and with our community.
Thank you. Did Cynthia want to say something?
That's a really good example of a parent talking to a child, and I'm talking a teenager as a child. They don't think they are, though. But the problem is too many parents talk at their kids. They say, well, I've got all this information. And then they talk at them, and the kids' eyes glaze over, and they don't listen. And inside, they're just kind of mad, You're not. We need to engage our young people with what and how questions. Like, what do you think this is teaching? How does this help show respect for women? What kind of a person is who thinks about this all the time? What kind of a person are they going to grow up to be? Would you respect that type of person? I mean, we're talking some real questions here that help that child really own it and learn how to think for themselves. Because I just know so many parents, they bring their kids in to me to try to get me to fix their kids, but the parents really are the ones who need fixing, because they are the ones who need to learn how to communicate respectfully with their child, and it really engaged them in an empathetic and wise way.
Thank you. And as part of that question, I didn't want to leave the second part out, is do we as a society have a role and responsibility? And like Steve said, the number one thing today is fame. So how do we change that? And where do we go from where you guys are seated?
I would just like to add that we don't have counter messages, and that's part of the discussion that needs to happen. We need to live the way we want our youth to aspire to, and so that might mean quitting the sexist jokes, or watching the T-shirts that we wear, or the beer ads, and having conversations about the counter messages, the ones that we want them to aspire to. Also, I think the risk with the internet is that it makes everything so anonymous, and this is a perfect example, these songs about what they say they're going to do to this person. Would you want that done to your mom, to your sister, to your girlfriend? And there's this anonymity that is given especially with the internet. So we need to make it real. These are real girls. These are real women who are being harmed by these behaviors, and call it out.
One of the things that we've been working, Patty's worked on it, and several other people, is we've been working on a course with the Minnesota High School League on respectful relationships. And it talks a lot about sexual harassment, sexual violence, domestic violence, areas that coaches have never really ever probably talked to other men about, much less their athletes about. And part of that education is going to be on the cultural context that our kids are living in. So really, when we look again at all of us as our responsibility and all those people that our kids listen to. I had a son that played college football and started in 2nd grade, and his coach was the be-all, end-all. What his coach said is what went. And we feel really encouraged. I know, Steve, I think you work with Tony Dungy's All-Pro Dad. I mean, there are coaches out there that can really make a difference, especially with some kids who maybe don't have a strong male role model. Having these coaches recognize the issue and then feeling comfortable talking with their athletes about it is one strategy that we've looked at from a prevention perspective. And that will be going on the Minnesota High School League as a required course for all high school coaches and athletic directors in Minnesota.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
There's a few that got text.
Got text up here? Technology.
Got a few text questions here. One is for Steve. Steve gave a charge for the girls involved in the activity. What's the charge for the guys?
I'd like to also reference, as I answer that question about some of the songs in the media and the words that come towards our young people. We have to be insistent that in our homes and in the lives of our young people that we're selective of what we listen to. Because the reality is our young people particularly are highly impressionable beings. And someone once said that if you say to a kid, you know, you're going to turn out just like your dad, he was a nothing and you're going to be a nothing, you know, that's one negative comment that that child would need 14 positive comments to offset that one negative comment because they are so highly impressionable. And so I do make challenges with the young women, and I think with the young men, I make challenges with the men as well. And I challenge them simply by saying that any old boy could play house, but it takes a man to build one. And how does that begin? They cherish me, honor me, adore me, and respect me. For a young lady is, for a young man is, I've taken the charge to cherish her, honor her, adore her, and respect her. And then to find that one very special young lady one day and have enough courage to put one of these on her finger and promise to satisfy her every day for the rest of her life. That is what it really takes to be a man of character and integrity. And making distinction between what it means to be a young man and if you're just still a boy. You have to begin to make the tough decisions now. And if our young men make the hard decisions now, life will be easy. If we do the easy things now, life will be hard. And one last thing, what I found out is that it comes back to being comfortable in your own skin. And I think one of the reasons why I've had some success in my assembly programs is I'm not saying you're wrong for doing this, you're wrong for doing that, you're wrong for doing that. What I'm really saying, and our young people understand, let's talk about our issues and let's reason together. How many of you know someone who's made one decision and it wrecked their life? And all kids raise their hand. And I'll say, do we really need another example? Do we really need you to become the next example? Don't you really want a life? Yes, you really want a life. What are the decisions that you're going to have to make in order to have the future that you want? The decisions that you make today are the seeds that grow your future. I was comfortable in my own skin. I was teased in middle school about the size of my head. My nickname was Lump. But I said, I'm going to be the baddest lump that ever lumped. And that was the encouragement that my my support group gave to me, my mom gave to me, who is really my support. If we can get young people to recognize they have opportunity, purpose, and a future, make the tough decisions now so you can soar like an eagle. Our young people who do not soar typically do not get off the ground because they don't have the courage to cut off the chickens that they're hanging with. Chickens don't fly. Be comfortable in your own skin. Be who you've been called to become. Pursue your purpose, because without purpose, abuse is inevitable.
Thank you, Steve. And then again, the panel keeps speaking about young girls. What about young boys? Is the story similar? Or maybe how does it differ? And then also I've had questions about, is there trafficking amongst boys? So if you could address.
You know, I want to say, just respond quickly, and then I know others have something to say. And I have a youth center in Southeast D.C., and I've witnessed young men who were victims of adult failure, and they were victims of abuse, and it was astonishing to me. Particularly one young man who came to me, he was concerned. I said, let's talk. We sat in my office. I said, what's wrong? He was an 18-year-old kid. He said, I lost my virginity last night. And I'm thinking to myself, we can work through this. That's what I'm thinking to myself. I said, we can work with you on this. And he said, well, you don't understand. I said, what? He said, the person I lost my virginity with, he called me this morning and told me he was HIV positive and I need to check myself. You know. That was a curveball for me. You know, he was a victim of a 29-year-old man who took advantage of him, and I've seen that. I've seen men, young boys, struggle because of the victimization that they've experienced, and I think some of the same guidelines and some of the same responses we have to this type of exploitation is critical in working with our young men to get them to overcome and see their value and worth.
We've investigated, of all the cases involving underage girls that I've investigated, I've only investigated 3 that involved men or boys. The challenges that go along with even opening or detecting a case like that are so much greater, as difficult and challenging as it is for us to locate and rescue underage female victims. The challenges that go along with male victims are just really substantial, and a big part of that is our unpreparedness institutionally, I think, in law enforcement to really work with those victims. We've worked with male survivors of sexual abuse for a long time, but trafficking is just a much more complicated thing because of the cultural things that go along with that, and as much as girls don't self-report, boys really don't self-report. So that creates a big issue for us.
Statistically, it is more girls that are trafficked than boys. However, we don't know. We simply don't know. Boys don't report. They do couch hop, and they do survival sex, and we know they're exploited in other ways as well. So it's underreported, and we don't have the answers yet.
I want to thank the whole panel. If you did not get your question answered, you can send an email to info@hopeandrescue.org, and the panel or the organization will continue to have a dialogue answering some questions.